Good afternoon. Can you guys hear me? You all? It looks like Alrie has already started to introduce herself. She has been working with this Network 25 for several years and has been really instrumental in starting native gardens in different schools around Santa Clara and San Jose County. And so, without further ado, Alrie.
Can you go back to the first slide? Yeah. All right, thank you. Thank you, John. Thank you all for coming and your interest in teaching gardens for children and the bigger picture of eco-villages and regenerative farms and native gardens. All right, I am an artist, I'm a designer, I'm a teacher, I'm a writer, and I'm a businesswoman. And I got involved with the California Native Garden Foundation. I'm one of the founders in 2004. We're headquartered here in San Jose. These are drawings that I've done that are logos for the different parts of the business. ELSEE, the teaching garden, is located 10 minutes from here, and that's why I'm inviting all of you to come by this afternoon and experience it firsthand. The image on the right is the lab for nature-based urban living, and that is what we are calling ourselves now. It's still the California Native Garden Foundation, but it is the lab for nature-based urban living. And the center logo is ELSEE. That's an acronym for the Environmental Lab for Sustainability and Ecological Education. Our mascot is a Thule elk. And the one on the far left or right is our logo for the California Native Garden Foundation. Next. So I've already said what ELSEE means, and this project was started, I have to say the project was started 7 decades ago. 7 decades ago when I was a small girl in southern Michigan. And I'm going to dedicate this talk to my mom and dad, Alvarine and Alfred Rosecrans. I grew up in the Rust Belt. My father worked at the tire company. He was a chief engineer there and fixed all the machines that made the tires. My mother was a housewife, and she was a gardener. And we had about 3 acres outside of a small town in Michigan, Jackson, Michigan. And my mother grew all the food for the family in the summer. And she fermented and canned. And then behind the family plot was a woods. The woods was a deciduous hardwood ecosystem, plant community. And I discovered nature there when I was about 4 years old. My dad was a hunter. He taught me to shoot a rifle, and we hunted pheasant together. My mother wild foraged, especially the blueberries when they came in the fall. And that was my childhood. And my childhood was spent wandering the woods behind my house. And in 1955, the Interstate Highway Act came through. And it cut a huge freeway in the middle of our woods. And I have been upset about that my whole life, and that has driven the work that I'm still doing today. So here I am, graduated from high school, going to college. I studied theater, I studied music, I studied the arts, the humanities, religion, English. I kind of made up my own major. And so that's a part of my life. And here I am, much later, leading hikes. I was lucky enough to be invited to give some garden talks at the Striping Arboretum. Before I got that involved with natives, I'm a plant geek, so I was involved with deciduous hardwood forests in southern Michigan. I was involved with tropical plants through a company I started called Interior Landscape Design. And then I was involved with Mediterraneans and finally natives through a company I started called Middlebrook Gardens. And in that process, next slide. Oh, this is another piece of my life. When I met Dr. Cater, the author of a book that we wrote together called Designing California Native Gardens, the Plant Community Approach to Artful Ecological Gardens, I met my second husband, and he said, oh, I really want to get to know you. I said, well, if you want to get to know me, we need to hike California because I want to learn 2,000 plants that I can garden with. And the only way I was going to do that was to actually get out with Glenn, my teacher, who actually knew the places to go. And that came from Lester Roundtree. And Lester Roundtree, you can look her up. She ran a nursery, and Carmel lived to be 100 years old. And she discovered some of these pristine hikes in California. And so that was my journey, and I'm still on that journey today. All right, so when I drove by the location of ELSEE, this is what it looked like in 1999. So we've been developing this garden for 22 years in San Jose, California. And that's what it looks like today. Okay, so we have 26 programs here. And it's defined by something called the Sustainable Sites Initiative. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it's part of the United States Green Building Council. And the incredible part of this, we were a pilot project for the Sites Initiative. The incredible part about this is that it does encompass 200 benchmarks for sustainable urban land use. 200 benchmarks. And so to reach the certificate level, you have to actually show those in your execution of the land use model. So what we did, because I'm an artist, and we were building 1,000 native gardens in Northern California, and also in Southern California too. So we would come across pieces in people's neighborhood they didn't want anymore. We'd tear down decks, you know, we'd find found objects, and so we'd haul them over to the garden. So this is Big Red, a building that recycles itself and grows its own food. That was designed by a student intern. We started working with student interns in 2006. I've had more than 500 student interns from all over the world, and we are connected now. And that's a very important part of what I'm going to talk about in a few minutes. Okay, this is the Dino Coop, and this won an award, Fossil Magazine. An art teacher that teaches her classes in the garden presented this problem to 3rd and 5th graders. We want you to do a pictograph of the evolution of the dinosaur to the modern day chicken. And I was really interested in having them show, you know, what the landscapes of the planet were like 250 million years ago. And so this is a chronicle not just of the evolution of the animal, but the evolution of the landscape, how the landscape changes on our planet through the fossil record. And they won an award for this, so we're very proud of the kids. Also, outside, before you even enter the gate, there's a junction box, a PGE box, and this is the California sister butterfly flying around, pollinating in his oak woodland habitat. There is the CITES certification. We are a community partner with CITES, and we're now trying to influence them to include a benchmark for urban agriculture. And I'm going to talk about that and how, you know, restoration of native ecology and the rewilding of cities is complementary to regenerative agriculture. All right, so here is a modern day teaching garden. One of the things that's happened to us along the way is we've started to make institutional partners. And that's really been effective because now our ELSEE model, the flagship model, is actually, we're actually able to replicate it at underserved schools, particularly in San Jose. Some of the poorest school districts in the school, in our town, we are building these ELSEE teaching gardens. And we start with pre-K. So there's a typical one. Now, before we were able to, you know, build these important community institutional relationships, we would give out design grants. So we started giving out design grants in 2006. And we gave design grants. That's to schools that would like to design a native garden, have a native garden, but they don't know how to do it. And so we just gave the design grant, and we gave that design grant to 84 schools. And so we had a big impact, and these were schools all over the state, you know, not just in Northern California. But one of them is the St. Andrew's Episcopal School, and this was a private school, still is a private school in Saratoga. But we were able to create these gardens, riparian habitat, and here's one of my drawings. I spent a lot of time on this drawing because I knew that this school could raise the money to actually get this garden built. It was really important to see these gardens get built, you know, where we had a chance to actually manage the installation and stay on, you know, to help develop curriculum. One of the things that we do in our curriculum, and we now have 4 certificates that we can award to students who would take a 32-week class. And this is through our local community college, the San Jose Evergreen Community College District, the Workforce Institute. But what we do is, and this goes back to Indigenous studies, and I've been a student of Indigenous studies for a long time because to me it made the most sense of how we were going to live on the planet, especially with our Indigenous community here in California, because we know now that they go back at least 30,000 years. And so what they were doing when Europeans came here was so significant. And what we learn about how to teach children is we teach children through animate objects, animate, you know, animals. And so it's the idea of you connect the animal with the plant. And these primary relationships are what stick because we're animals. And children want to learn about other animals. And so it's these pairings of relationships that make the difference in how they ultimately began to understand and appreciate and love native plants. And so here, that's an example of it with the mosaic tables. This is one of our partnership projects. This is with Educare Silicon Valley. That was started by Warren Buffett's daughter. And they have 25 of these Educare centers around the world, or no, around the US. And what they do is they cater to the underserved student. Here's some of our partners on the far right. That is San Jose Evergreen Community College District, the Workforce Institute, and then Educare, and then myself, and one of our board members, and the staff teacher there. All right, so this is how we go about doing it. We design the garden, and this is the Santee playground concept. And so this is using an oak woodland, a grassland, and a chaparral, and we're incorporating what we call ROA mounds, regenerative organic agriculture. I learned regenerative agriculture by going to Africa and working there in a small village in Ghana, where I met a Ghanaian who had his PhD from the University of Illinois. And he operates the Center for No-Till Agriculture. So regenerative organic agriculture is conservation agriculture. What we did is we made a hybrid of it. So we have ecological restoration. We have hedgerows that are replicated riparian, chaparral, wetland, and then the commodity crops in the middle are based on a food pyramid that we developed. You'll see that later. But these are the plant lists. Now, to get to look at these more closely, look at that QR code, and you can see the plants that we're using. I don't want to spend time talking about plants right now because there's so much to cover.
Yeah, there's actually a link to the slide deck on the Google Sheet. Yep.
Okay. One of the big things that I harp on all the time is kids getting their hands in healthy soil. Healthy soil is soil that has many, many native plants in it that are native to the region where the garden is. And the more biodiversity there is in the plant community that you're working with, the healthier the soil is going to be for the children who are playing in it. And we also cite a number of studies where this is already established, abstract publications. There's a publication out of Finland, I think 2019. I won't talk about that, but if you have a chance, go ahead and read that. It's very enlightening. We don't like to use tables and chairs and all the accoutrements of an indoor classroom. We want the kids directly out playing in nature. This is a typical class. They're under the oak tree, and of course we're going to have a lot of lessons when the acorns are falling, but there's our teacher. So here's a lesson plan where we are pairing up the California quail with the acorn, and the kids are wearing little headbands like they're quail, and they're out hunting for the acorns, and then the lesson comes. We also use the Luther Burbank Opuntia ficus indica, which is a hybrid. He actually hybridized over 60 Opuntias. And these were to create Opuntia as a commodity crop. And, this is a big crop for Mexicans who were born in Mexico and come here. And it's a way to connect the Mexican community to our gardens, even though I catch flack from the California Native Plant Society because it's technically not a species native, it's a hybrid. Here's our teacher talking about the elderberry and the elderflower. You can harvest both. And we also make a different food recipes using this, and we serve those to the children and the mothers and the teachers, and we give them the recipes. So it's another way, like we talk about animals being an entryway. Well, food is a great entryway to change people's point of view about ecology. There's another one. They love this one, making ceanola soap. And according to the ELSEE model, with the Sustainable Sites certification, we have a constructed wetland, the sink, and this was designed by a graduate student and then installed by our professional team with the help of student volunteers and other interns. At ELSEE, we have an aquaponics system. Aquaponics is one of 3 controlled environment agricultural systems, and this is growing food in urban environments on top of buildings, on asphalt, in places where the soil is so degraded or, let's keep going. Earth Heroes Nature Camp is another program that we have incorporated here. 11 years we've had Earth Heroes Nature Camp. They earn badges. Let's keep going. The next one we're working on is a mindful aging project, and this is in conjunction with the Agrihood, and I want to move on to the Agrihood just so we cover that. Here's our Youth Corps. If you come tonight, you'll see some Youth Corps members. Here's our food pyramid. I won't really discuss it. We grow 6 categories of food in our regenerative farm. Here's some of the native edible plants that we grow and that we make recipes with and that we pair up with animals. Here is our Hester farm. It's a teaching, training, and research farm, 10 minutes away. There's our native hedgerow with a commodity crop called tree collards. It perennializes in San Jose. And some of the foods that we sell at our farm stand, the prickly pear jelly, our salad bags, 10 super greens, including 3 native edibles. Mesquite, another native edible. We make a lot of mesquite cookies. We got a great recipe. You'll taste those tonight. And indigenous chefs who specialize in native edible foods. And here's a drawing about Silicon Valley Eco-Village to the world. This is the last part of our talk today, and it really is thinking about this model and expanding it to be eco-villages, low-income, affordable housing. This is the first one. It's a $250 million project. I was a consultant on that for 7 years, 75 public meetings later. Yes, we did get the vote. And it was the only development project that had a working farm, 1.7 acres on a 6-acre site devoted to plant communities, agriculture, open space. We're very proud of that. More things are happening in Silicon Valley like this. This is open space. It doesn't have a farm. And here's the building under construction. That's going to open in 2004. Core Development is a partner with us, and we're creating a mindful aging project over there, very similar to what we do with the pre-K program. And then here are some gardens that we're working on now at underserved schools. There's a team. We're finishing up that garden. That was last weekend. This is a children's garden at the Los Gatos Library, but our entry point with all of our work is the pre-K garden, because that's the most important group that we want to work with. That's the entry into public school, and then we go all the way through the 12th grade and junior college. And who do we rely on? The students who are taking the certificate classes that are actually studying, ecological land management or regenerative agriculture or pre-K, nature immersion and food in the certified teaching garden. And that's what you'll see if you come over today. I took that photograph 2 days ago. Thank you. Do we have any time for questions? Yes.
Sure.
5 minutes.
Sure.
5 minutes. Anybody want to ask a question? I've got a mic up here. You can use this one. Oh, thank you. No questions. Oh, somebody. Here, we've got some.
Alrie, how do you pay for it all?
$1 at a time. We've designed and built over 1,000 native gardens. And so we have a vigorous design build group. It's a small group, but they're very skilled at what they do. And we work with a lot of community volunteers. And I think it's also very timely right now, but I do want to say that the garden that you're going to see today, I do not own. And so we are getting ready to raise money, and this young woman right here is a big part of that. $3.3 million on land that's what? $5 to $7 million an acre. We're only 2,000 feet from Google's headquarters. Yeah.
Hi, we got a resolution passed last February in the Los Angeles Unified School District for PK through 12 climate education.
Wow, that's good.
But climate education, climate is just it's a symptom of
Right.
the deeper problem, right?
Yes,
So sounds like you're treating the deeper problem.
yes.
So rolling this out is much more difficult than actually having, a resolution passed, even though it's binding.
It's easy to pass resolutions.
Yeah, it's not.
People
it's not
sit in a
just words.
room and vote on it. It doesn't have much to change. It doesn't have to do with land use change. What we are interested in doing is changing how we use land in cities.
So how would there's 4 trainings, all-day trainings for the climate literacy champions that are now financed in each school. Although they want to roll that out over 5 years, not 2.
Yeah.
One climate teacher in each school 5 years from now.
Yeah.
Anyway, what would be the best way for the district to partner with you to get the training that get some of the training that the kids need?
Well, that's not a simple question to answer. There's nothing simple in this. It's very complex because you're dealing with ecosystems. But I would say what we're doing here, it really does require live education. You cannot do this on a Zoom. You have to learn how to work with plants, in an urban environment where that particular piece of soil is highly disturbed. And you have to know the technical specifics of how to reclaim that soil. What we're trying to do is to create an Eat, Grow, Learn center where all the people associated with that center, either they live there or they live walking distance from there, their carbon footprint is significantly reduced because they have local food security and it is rewilding of cities where children actually are getting their gut microbiomes informed with a very complex microbiology that they only get from native soil, that is complex, that has a lot of species biodiversity in it. Yeah.
So one thing that I really talk about a lot with the work I do with CNGF is there's this default mode in our society to see technology or even nature as the solution. And I really, really, really like to emphasize kinship making, not community, but the kinship making. And so really pulling our lens back from the human solution. The human solution is us. And what's going to help us be resilient in climate change is the ability to care for each other. And starting from there makes it a lot easier to deal with the complexity and the mishigas that constantly goes on trying to do this.
I think we're out of time. I don't want to, how are we doing? Should I? 2 more minutes. Okay, anybody else have a question? Yes. She's coming.
Since we live in the same area, I'm from the Morgan Hill area, and
Right.
I am Native American. We do have a native garden that we planted at the Morgan Hill house, but we really don't know what we're doing, so how do we connect?
Oh, I think this is great. We do have one of our Bill 25 sites is a project called Freshness Farms at Coyote Creek, and that is an 8-acre farm surrounded by food forests, restoration of the Coyote Creek, and I'll be talking to you about that. We're also working with Pajaro Valley Indian, Pajaro Valley Ohlone Indian Council. Do you know either Patrick or Tonio? No. All right, well, Juicy, why don't you tell them about what's happening? This would be very interesting.
As some of you probably don't know this, and if you do know, all of the native people from this area are landless. In the early 1900s, the Bureau of Indian Affairs basically struck all the tribes from this area off the register. And so a lot of the tribes, there's, infighting and confusion over whose land is what, and it's really hard. And so with the California Native Garden Foundation, we're trying to work with the local tribes to make sure we don't exacerbate those problems and help them reach the community and help share their wisdom with the community. And so we're working with them, but we also want to work with more people. And so you can send us an email at community@cngf.org, and we can see how to do that. I'll write it down for you. Yeah.
Any other questions? We're out of time. Okay, don't forget, come over 5 to 7, have some wonderful native edible food, and experience what we may lose, but we don't think we are going to lose it.
Hi, everyone. So it's a little hard following on the heels of Alrie, but Alrie, that's all right. We're only one little garden, but I want to be talking about its life cycle. My hopes today are really, first off, just to connect with people. I want to give you a chance to see what it's like, the victories as well as the challenges of establishing a school garden, especially from the teacher's perspective, and obviously I'd love to share resources. So I teach 5th grade. I've taught 3rd and 4th. I do think teaching 4th was probably the most influential part of deciding to establish a native garden, just because the 4th grade curriculum is so integrative. I taught environmental education at Hidden Villa, which is an environmental education facility not far from here. That was in the early aughts. I don't have a botany background. I was a Chinese lit major, so definitely a generalist. But I did grow up exploring nature, both around here in the Sierra Nevada and the mountains. And when I'm not teaching or gardening, I still like to spend time outside with my family as much as I can. This is one view of our garden. This is a mature side of it. Our garden is almost exclusively natives. I do have crushes on a few non-native plants. We all may have those, but that's okay. We've tried to really mix whimsy and education in the garden. I think that's going to be really important. So we have places for kids to sit, to mash up toyon berries, to pick flowers and suck the nectar of sage flowers. We have little figures that you'll see later on, but we also have a ton of educational signage that I've developed with students over the years. So you'll get a chance to see it more. Our school is about 7 miles from here. We are called LP Collins Elementary. I know this is an older photo because we have since landscaped all that area around the trees at the top. We're definitely like right in the heart of technology country. So when Apple was building their spaceship campus, we could count the cranes in the skyline. Most of our students are going to be children of H-1 visa holders who are tech workers. So they are about half living in apartments with their parents going to be having company provided visas. And we have others who are kind of on their way, either green cards or achieving citizenship status. Definitely the intense pressure of Silicon Valley is a factor at our school. Kids feel a lot of pressure, but also we're seeing, and I'm sure your school communities are experiencing this too, with the cost of living going up. We're seeing a lot of economic stress starting to just compound on kids, even in a place you don't think of being like that, like Cupertino. So my talk, by the way, I shared this with my mom before we started, and she used to be an English teacher, and she's like, why are you showing text that you're going to be reading? They don't be doing that. And I was like, okay, Mom, I've already submitted it. I can't edit it anymore. But my talk, I really want to be looking, I have two structures. I'm going to give you a timeline about kind of the beginning of our garden to where it is now in maturity, but I'm also going to be looking at what I kind of think about like scales of influence of gardens on a school community as well as on individual students. And I've seen that when you're starting a garden, it becomes this big community event, but kids aren't necessarily being impacted on an individual level. Right? It's a big community celebration and everyone's coming, but over time, kids start to develop those individual relationships with plants and eventually become empowered to make a difference. So I think, but you can't have one without the other, but I do think there's a kind of an arc and a timeline to it. I also have to be really real with you. I have a lot of other responsibilities, just like I imagine everyone here. We're all balancing family, our careers, other interests, so nothing exists in a vacuum. So I do want to kind of be real with you about, it's not always easy, and there are some years where you just don't get as much done with the garden, and I do think we have to be kind with ourselves about that. But also one of the benefits of a native garden is they endure. Those plants, they last. How many school gardens have you all seen where it's a vegetable garden, they got neglected, there was an involved PTA parent, and now it's covered in weeds? Right, so I think we've all seen that. So I think that's one of the other benefits about native gardens, just from that perspective. So the early days of our garden were really an incredible time. So on the left, you can see the bottom, what it looked like. That's 1 year later, and you saw that photo of the mature garden. We initially started having, I won't get into the details of the fundraising and how we planned it and all those things. I don't think it's central to what I want to be talking about today, but it was big. I'll talk more about it, but it was just lots of kids, lots of people. After fundraising and public education, we had these big planting days. So we worked with Foothill College's landscape architecture program. They helped us, did a soil study. After a lot of planning, we put it together. Not really pictured here, but on the next one, there's dozens of families who had each signed up for and adopted a plant that are planting them and putting them in the ground. This is really exciting. Both of these students are now much older, and I've worked with them over many years. But don't forget, they barely know how to use a shovel. They're excited to use a hose and squirt their friends. And they don't know a thing at this point about the plants and what they do. So again, there's a high level of community engagement, but that intimate knowledge and kind of sense of empowerment isn't there yet. We kind of eventually had to pare things down. You're gonna remember that photo a few back where there was like dozens of kids. We started off with lunchtime meetings, and then we did after school meetings, and we had a ton of parent volunteers. We'd be running, I don't know, something like 6 different concurrent activities. All at the same time. We'd have the skipper group, and we'd have the hummingbird group, and we'd have the fence lizard group, and they'd all be doing something different. And oh my gosh, it took a lot of time. However, we're still very close with, like my family is very close with a lot of the families that we work with at this time. It was definitely a period of like deep relationship building. Speaking of deep relationship building, the teacher with whom we started the garden, she's now my bride, so couldn't do this without her. And one thing led to another. So, yeah, so that's my daughter. We were trimming back deer grass. That's my son. On the way back from a soccer practice, it had just rained, and there's no greater joy than walking in a garden after the rain. And then those are our two dogs. That is, responsibilities mount. Like I said, things don't happen in a vacuum. And this time, these responsibilities are kind of taken, I don't want to say taken away, but they've put a lot of those other garden time into context. And, anyways. All right, back in the early days, we had a garden club after we started doing a lot of maintenance. So here their kids have just planted a mallow. And there you're seeing we did a lot of trimming every year. So these are kids, they absolutely adored hauling away all of these cuttings, putting them into the compost heap. They loved using tools. You have to obviously teach them how to not cut their fingers. But that was really fun. In the back, you're going to see the photo on the left, all the parent volunteers we had. So this was all done after school. But a few years ago, well, I'll get there. We did a bunch of different activities, nature journaling, rock flipping. We worked with the Audubon Society to create birdhouses for chickadees, blue wrens. So we worked with them. They helped us do that. We made all these different signs. We made bee blocks. We would save seeds and send those home for kids to plant. So that was all going on. So John asked us to really highlight student voices in our presentation. So one of the things I wanted to do is share the words of Emer. So she's now in nursing school, but she had some really great things to say about her experience in Garden Club. So it's still one of her fondest memories at Collins. Not only did it teach me so much about our native plants, but show me how to be a kinder person who appreciates the simple beauties of nature. One of my favorite parts of the club was the art projects. Painting rocks and signs that we scattered around the garden made me feel like I played a role in enhancing the natural art created by the plants. These projects allowed me to merge something that I had previously loved to do, being creative, with something new to me, gardening. I vividly remember painting a pink worm on a rock with a green background. She was 8 and she's now 23. Okay, so just to put that into perspective. I love going into the garden after it rained and seeing all the real worms scattered next to my rock. Something about the simple experience of seeing my contributions next to earth creations was so magical and fulfilling. To this day, I remember the basics of composting, I understand the importance of bees, and I can even name native plants I come across while hiking, a skill that impresses many of my friends. All of these attributes are because of my time in Garden Club, and I will always be thankful. All right, a real highlight of Garden Club was going to be participating in the Going Native Garden Tour. So we would give students about a 4-week or 5-week introduction where they would have to go around, they would practice, they would learn plant identification, they would be able to teach participants in the tour about the plants that they're looking at. That was really, really fun. I'll show you it in their hands of the two students. You're going to see some informational cards. I'll share those with you in a little bit. I'll show you what those look like. One of the final big projects of Garden Club recently is we received a grant from the Happy Hollow Progress for Pollinators program. So this was a program I did with 3rd through 5th graders. The K through 2 students were just not quite capable of this one. So I collected a lot of garden books, created templates, and then on Google Drive and shared Drive, the students would create all of these different signs using slides, which is a really powerful tool for editing images. So we've got garden signs spread out all over the garden, and then educational signs that are all the way down the fence. So this is this is more of the interpretive and like kind of educational side of our garden. And it was really, really fun to see kids put these together. So as the garden matured, we definitely pivoted from creation of the garden to getting kids into it in classroom settings. So some of the lessons that I've really enjoyed doing is if you, in your bag, you're gonna see a little flip card from the UC Berkeley Urban Bee Lab. So there we go, that's the one right there. So one of the authors from there named Sarah Leon Guerrero, she came to Collins and she gave talks more than once and taught us about their work in monitoring bee species. It's so easy to just go out with children and broadcast miner's lettuce seeds and then harvest it later. I'll show you a card later of how we've used the garden for ethnobotany, and for especially that's important for 3rd and 4th grade social studies. And then even you can get you can get really creative with it, creating haikus on pieces of cut grocery bag, nature haikus, and then leaving them out to get rained on and watching them weather. There's really fun, like kind of language arts pieces that you can do. One of my favorite projects I've done, and this is again going back to the Urban Bee Lab, is going to be a bee attractiveness study. So as you can see from the mask, this is going to be last year, the 21-22 school year. So first thing we need to do is we need to teach students to just identify the different bee species. So I've created these documents for kids to be able to tell them apart. It's amazing how many kids have are nature phobic, especially about carpenter bees. I don't know, something about carpenter bees freaks kids out, but then getting them to be able to like, oh, you can actually pet them with the back of your finger. And it goes from revulsion to fascination. So what they're doing here is they're labeling, they set a timer, and then I'm just really just using the Urban Bee Lab's methodology here. And then they're gonna be, this is the grading rubric you're gonna see on the right. And so I'm also integrating this with our graphing units in math. So this is very interdisciplinary. So they're gonna be able to, I make them on graph paper first, graph their data, and then we use Google, and they compare their graph from on graph paper to the one that the computer spit out for them. And one of the interesting things they're going to see is like, oh wait, when I look at lavender, it's all honeybees, and then the top is going to be Cleveland sage, which all you all know, and they're going to really see, oh wow, there's such a greater diversity of bees, and there are native bees being supported through this work. So it's just really powerful science, and it's just really fun for them. Other projects that we've done, this is definitely more kind of a 4th grade standard at this point with the NGSS, but it's going to be food webs. So we teach them that they look out in the garden. This is all using slides. Again, slides is your friend. And I can show you templates. I have my email at the end, so reach out to me, please. And I want your stuff too. So if you have good stuff that I would like, that's why I'm here. So give it to me at the end, please. So yeah, they're just seeing all these complex relationships, and then after we go through 3 food chains, I then make them create a food web. So I'm going to say you need to create 7, like at the base you're going to need 7 different producers, and then you're moving up the trophic pyramid. So this is some words from my student Anish. So he is only in 6th grade now. And this is what he had to say. So you're going to see some of my prompts because I reached out to former students and just to say, like, you know, you're going to see my prompts with the arrow next to them. I learned about the dense ecosystem that exists in the garden, like lizards, bugs, and birds, the food chain. Are you or your family currently engaged in any activities that benefit the environment? Yes, the Collins Garden inspired us to create native wildflowers in our sidewalk strip. They attracted a lot of native bees and birds. Now, one other thing about Anish is his family gets it because at the end of the year, I didn't get like a Target card from them because sometimes you get teacher gifts. They gave me a gift certificate to Larner Seeds. So, and I was like, oh, you get me. That was like absolutely the best. So connecting to natural history, when we introduce kind of life ways of, you know, pre-contact, we have to talk about this idea of the shopping list. So since we're growing so many natives, we'll say like, okay, I need you to go shopping, and then they'll have laminated versions of these cards. They'll walk them out into our garden, and then they will be creating a shopping list of what they want to pick up. So this is just, you know, again, this out there. I would love to eventually get down to having enough, you know, wiregrass for them to learn to make baskets, but I don't really know how to do that myself, so I'm still learning. All of these, you know, I don't want to be taking a victory lap today. There's a lot of challenges to this, and I wanted to make sure to share those with you. Just A, transparency, and B, I imagine we all face many of the same challenges. So definitely, you know, I'm the most plant comfortable person in our campus, so obviously my classes are going to go more. So getting colleagues who are interested and comfortable getting out there, you know, it is a challenge. So a lot of my job needs to be pivoting towards curriculum development and like colleague development. So as you're also seeing, it takes extra work in a life where there isn't unlimited time to create these resources. And especially teacher folk, you know that sometimes you roll in, you had a tough morning, get into your classroom, and you've got to teach all 5 subjects. And so sometimes you're just pulling it out, you know, and so you don't always have that opportunity. And then, as I said before, the responsibilities is not a vacuum. I'm running short on time, so I want to kind of fly through this last part. I want to get to that smallest scale of influence. So the smallest scale of influence, I think, is in many ways the most powerful. What you're seeing are two images, and I'll get into them right now. First off, I think recess really, really matters in creating, and going back to what Alrie had to say, kids need spaces in their schools for like Totoro moments. Anyone know what I'm talking about? Yeah, all right. So they need moments of whimsy. They need moments where their imaginations run wild. So we have all these little statues and mini things. So the cats are having a picnic with the frogs, right? Then you're seeing at the top, kids, that's a showy milkweed seed pod. So, I mean, how could a kid not be utterly fascinated by that? And then all I have to do is just go like this, take a little pinch and go, and they love it, right? And then you're seeing at the bottom, they're just collecting little bits of stuff. And kids absolutely need this. They don't need directed experiences from us all the time. This has to be coming from them. But then also volunteerism has become a big part of our garden. So, you have Eagle Scouts or students fulfilling volunteer hours. The student here, Akash on the left, I worked with him and his two sisters all the way from the beginning, and then he came back and helped us with some major projects. I had experiences with Girl Scout troops that were really, really rewarding. These were student design gardens, and they designed it. I helped planted it, sourced the plants. Like, this is their work. I helped them with that. And I realized we're going to do the end. Former students went on to plant a garden at their next school, middle school. And then one of them, who wasn't even in our school, but was a part of this group, you're seeing at the top right, they've really gone on. We really just, their family was already really high-powered. These were high-achieving families, but they had a chance to go places with it. They got the inspiration from the garden, but now they are going places with this, working with the Audubon Society, working with 4-H, and a lot of it are going to be lessons that they learned working with us. So I'm going to kind of go through a little bit, like, what's next. As I said before, definitely lesson development. I think this is crucial. Science standards change all the time. So I think that there's just a shortage of these types of lessons that are kind of plug and play, like we know teachers need. I think Andrea and I, especially after putting this talk together, we think we're going to bring back the garden club, and we'll rejoin the tour. So I think this has really kind of lit a fire under me again. And then also, like, as I said, I really hope for me and for us that something comes out of all these interactions, of us meeting here in the same room, exchanging ideas, exchanging resources. So my name's easier to remember, like Nutter Butter, and then Christopher. So reach out to me, please. I really look forward to hearing from you. And I really appreciate your time. And I think we probably have time for a little bit of questions. Thank you.
Is that an underscore?
Yeah, thank you. That is an underscore there.
Oh, cool.
Ooh, it looks like I'll be hearing from you, Janie. Yeah.
So I'm Janie, and I work for Hacienda Environmental Science Magnet School here in San Jose, and we have a 1-acre native garden, so I'd love to connect with you. But I was wondering, in the summertime, what happens to the garden in terms of maintenance and watering and all that stuff?
Well,
because that's one of our challenges, is what happens to our school garden in the summer?
I mean, I'm definitely a garden junkie, and garden also functions as well. First off, I train volunteers to come and water, especially when we're on trips, especially just for new plants. So those are usually going to be your returning students. So I create slideshows. Going to be like, okay, this plant, here's how you water. You embed videos, and then you almost always want to have them come out, because our garden is just all along hose reels. So they literally need to learn how to reel a hose so it doesn't get tangled. So there's all of that. But I also love gardening, and if I can get a quiet hour before it's hot on a summer morning to get out there and take care of them myself, it clears my mind too. So it's a mix, I would say.
How did you provide or receive funding for this?
So So at the time, our PTA had a lot more of a surplus than it does now. So we kind of did two things. We submitted a proposal, and the PTA provided, I want to say, $5K. And then we did fundraising, where we created this big binders. And in the binders, you would flip through, and you would say, if you provide $20, you'll get to plant a 1-gallon plant. Talk about a markup, right? And then, and we're talking 2008 prices. And then $50, you get to plant a $5 plant. So then, so we would keep track of who signed up for what, and then those families would actually we would say, this is the plant, this going in this spot right here, you're going to plant it. So that kind of started building those relationships, and it took a lot of organization, but that was how we did it. Since then, I definitely, in teacher style, will spend some of my own money on this stuff without getting reimbursed. We have received some grants here and there along the way, either as I described from parks, so it's happening. I'm definitely getting ideas from Alrie. I know I want to reach out to them, and that's generally how it's happened. I think we have time for one more.
I'm wondering what role parents have played in supporting the garden and/or as volunteers. Thanks.
Oh, thank you. Especially at the beginning, the parent volunteers were critical to running all of our stations. At Garden Club, especially with the littles, we would give, Garden Club would be so popular that we would have more kids than we could accept. So we would say, if you come with a parent volunteer, you're a guaranteed admission. I mean, it really, and it didn't, and we didn't say you had to volunteer every time, but you would need to volunteer some of the time, especially with kids and tools that was really necessary. There are programs out there. You might want to look into Living Classroom through Los Altos School District. They have a very different model, but they have volunteers who come in, but they also have staff that are there kind of helping the volunteers interpret and do the activities. So I would say volunteerism, especially early in the garden, was huge to getting off the ground, but recently it's been less because it's getting pretty mature. All right, really appreciate your time. Thanks, everybody.
So I'm going to start off by talking about where I came from. I was raised by parents, one who was an English teacher in a high school for 30 years, and my other parent was a plein air painter and artist. And so my roots are definitely more in the arts and humanities, but in college I studied biology, and this is where I really gained an appreciation and a love for the outdoors and for science. I started a natural history club at Mike's school. After I graduated, I had experiences with field work. I got to travel and work as a naturalist in the Peruvian Amazon. An amazing number of experiences, and I certainly wouldn't be here today without them. I'm sure that many of you in the room can relate to that sentiment that outdoor education is a big part of why we do what we do and why we're here today. Unfortunately, in the year that shall not be named, these experiences were no longer a reality for a lot of people, and so missed field seasons, canceled study abroad semesters. This left a really big impact on science and, more importantly, on a generation of young scientists. But luckily, the science didn't stop entirely. A lot of us shifted to remote work, to revisiting old data sets, to writing, whatnot. And it's amazing that we're here in person today, but opportunities like virtual conferences were suddenly more accessible to people like myself and other students who couldn't afford to travel. And so this presented some really great opportunities. So in 2020, I moved to Santa Barbara, and I attended 2 virtual conferences, the Entomological Society and Ecological Society of America meetings those years, which were wonderful. I was able to network for the first time and join the conversation about the intersection between art and science, which was pretty impactful. And this one chat transcript in particular stuck out to me. This idea that more data never changes minds really rang true. For a lot of us, and for myself, I love doing science, I love asking questions, collecting data, but for me at least, the raw data is never enough. We need more, and for a lot of us, there's a deeper personal meaning embedded in the work that we do. So I took a screenshot of this and I always think about it. This is also why I've maintained an artistic practice alongside my scientific career, and I found a lot of joy and gratitude in doing this. So working for the Cheadle Center for Biodiversity and Ecological Restoration in Santa Barbara, I was a collections intern and art science research fellow. The Cheadle Center houses a large and locally focused collection of plants and animals, birds, reptiles. I was working mainly in the herbarium and invertebrate zoology collection. And a lot of the work that the Cheadle Center, I'll refer to it also as CBER, does is that they do ongoing biodiversity surveys of local plants and insects, digitizing the records and uploading those to global databases like GBIF and Portal so that they're openly accessible to the public for research and personal use. Here's just one such example of an ongoing survey that is conducted of the bees on Santa Cruz Island in the Channel Islands National Park, and it's kept up to date so that people can use it for research and personal use. At the same time that I was working at the Cheadle Center, I was also spending a lot of time outdoors during the pandemic and being a witness to local changes, seasonal changes in my surroundings. And as a community ecologist, I was also paying a lot of attention to the interactions between species in my environment. As a fun aside, this was recently printed on the new Seabird t-shirts, so if you are interested, you can maybe look into getting one of those. And my advisor at the time, Katja Seltman, encouraged me to apply for something called the Coastal Fund, which is a pool of money that exists and is available. It exists because whenever a student enrolls at UC Santa Barbara, a small portion of their tuition goes towards the Coastal Fund, and the project, or the fund, is available for anyone to apply for within the community. It could be individuals or organizations, as long as the project satisfies the mission statement, which is to celebrate, explore, and protect the coastal ecosystems around UC Santa Barbara. You can do more reading about the Coastal Fund just by looking it up. And so I had an idea, and that idea was to design a science communication project that blended abstract art, scientific research, and experiential education to explore, celebrate, and preserve the dynamic California coastal ecosystem that I was appreciating and enjoying every day. My project had 5 main goals here: to combine photography, ecology, and biodiversity informatics through art, to generate attention to local native plant collections, to highlight local research and restoration, strengthen community connection in place to coastal ecosystems, and to empower students through hands-on experiences. And the project had 3 main components, which I'll go through one by one. Ecologically informed photography, an experiential education workshop, and finally a public art exhibit. So the first component of this was the photography project, and as I was working remotely for CBER at first, I was spending a lot of time looking into the specimen portal online for sources of inspiration. And in the online portal, which is CCH2, or Consortium of California Herbaria, you can search plants by taxa, by date, by where they were collected, and by knowing the specific collector and number, it allows you to go into the physical herbarium, shown on the right there, and actually find the plant. It's like a plant library, it's very organized. And I was doing this and photographing some of these plants for fun. The main method I was using was film photography and multiple exposures, which I was interested in this technique. Here's a few examples, because they create sort of a composite image. And if you're not familiar with this technique, with film photography, you essentially expose one frame multiple times, as many times as you would like, and the images get laid on top of each other. There's no digital editing. It's all done inside the camera. And I was intrigued by this method because of sort of the lack of control that's associated with it, and the parallels between that and the scientific method. How, oftentimes we plan projects, have our methods, collect data, but ultimately it's like whatever happens, happens, and the results are kind of unexpected. So I used this technique first to highlight herbarium specimens in conversation with field specimens. I'll show a few examples of that. So I was interested in this one plant, Malacothamnus fasciculatus, or chaparral mallow, and I saw that this plant was located on UCSB's campus. So I used the portal and I went to this spot on Campus Point. I found either that specimen or, since this specimen was collected in 2003, its population, or maybe the same individual, and I photographed it. And I went into the collection and I photographed that herbarium sheet. And the resulting composite image that came, you can sort of see echoes of the field specimen as well as the herbarium specimen. And what's cool about this is that they're really in conversation with one another through time and space. Here's another example. This plant is called Clarkia. It's an annual herb, and it's increasingly threatened by non-native grasses that are co-occurring. And you can see sort of underlaying the Clarkia plants is this non-native thatch or grass in a field that it was growing in. This is sambucus or elderberry, and one thing that was fun about this photography project was being able to highlight some of the smaller aspects of the herbarium specimens themselves and just really blow them up into the frame. I also wanted to highlight the diversity of plant communities in coastal California, such as native grasslands, coastal salt marsh, chaparral, especially in Santa Barbara, and riparian ecosystems as well. And then finally, with the photography, I was hoping to reconstruct real and imagined plant communities. And so what this means, as I'm a community ecologist, I'm interested in what's co-occurring, what's co-flowering. So the next few photos are examples of multiple exposures where it's actually, this is four species co-flowering in the same place at the same time near my house. And so it's more of a snapshot rather than just capturing one flower of what's happening in the community. And the next two are co-flowering communities in restoration sites on campus at UC Santa Barbara. So now I'll talk about the experiential education workshop that I ran, which was held this past January for 4 consecutive Saturdays for 4 hours at a time. And the workshop was open. I opened it and advertised it broadly, and any UCSB student, graduate, or undergraduate was able to sign up for it. And this is also to say that it was a free workshop and no experience with photography or ecology was required. So I was hoping to sort of attract a wide range of people that were interested. And all materials were provided. They did need to provide their own film camera, but in the case that they didn't have one, I worked with them to try to find a more affordable solution or to borrow one. And during the workshop, we focused on these 3 main questions. What does it mean to be a witness to change in our surroundings? What does it mean to collect, curate, and preserve visual information? And how does the practice of observation of the natural world inform our daily lives? So the first week that we met, I passed out these field notebooks to everyone, and we went out onto campus and met with restoration staff, Chris Berry, to examine plants and to learn more about the coastal sage scrub habitat that these students were surrounded by every day but hadn't necessarily interacted with or gotten to know on their own. And so for many of the students, this was the first time that they had gotten on their hands and knees and touched plants and smelled them and asked questions about why is this here, and what does it mean ecologically, and where are we really? So we spent some time collecting plants as well and pressing them for the following week, where we made cyanotypes, which is also known as sun printing. You lay objects on top of sun-sensitive paper and expose them to the sun, and then you fix that negative image in a solution. I invited Cameron Hannah-Bick, who's the UCSB greenhouse manager, and a photographer to give a guest talk. And then we also spent some time learning how to photograph using film cameras. There was a wide range of experience in the room, from students who had never held a film camera to others who were extremely proficient and it was their passion. So we were able to sort of share amongst the group about tips and techniques. And then I also introduced this observational independent study that the students would focus on during the course of the 3 weeks on their own. And I invited them to select a subject, any kind of subject, and really just witness it changing over the course of 3 weeks, as I was doing in my own surroundings. Here's one such example. that someone did over the course of a year. And of course, these students had only 3 weeks to do it, but I chose this assignment because I thought I really enjoyed its structure and also its simplicity. These students weren't getting credit for doing the workshop, so it was on their own time, and I wanted it to be something enjoyable that they would actually get something out of, rather than feeling like a burden of another assignment because they were full-time students. And the assignment that I chose was inspired by this book, The Photographer's Playbook, an assignment in it called Limitation, Routine, and Repetition by John Sear. As an aside, this book is awesome. If you need any sort of inspiration, creativity, it has a lot of great assignments and stories, not just limited to photography, but I could see them being applied to science or any sort of education. And so I also introduced this practice of recording the metadata. And so those of you who are familiar with film photography know that when you take a photo on a film camera, it doesn't record the GPS or the time or the date or anything like that. So a little bit extra effort was required to capture where they took these photos. And you'll see where this comes in handy later. In the 3rd and 4th weeks, we met and we came back to these herbarium specimens where we pressed them and put them on. We learned about the process of preserving specimens for scientific use the way that it's done in herbaria. And we also met and put all of the students' work up on the wall, up on the walls for each other to walk around and give each other feedback. And this was important because the feedback process allowed students to gain confidence in sharing their work with other peers and having their work, having their work up for other people to judge. So now we've come to the public art exhibit, which was called Conversations with Collections. It was held this February in the Glass Box Gallery at UC Santa Barbara. It was up for a week with an open reception held on a Thursday evening. And over 100 people came to the reception. It was an extremely fun event with food and extremely successful, allowed people to appreciate the art and some of the specimens and celebrate each other's work that everything had gone into. In this gallery room, you can see the herbarium specimens and the cyanotypes up on that back wall alongside the student work. And not every student, actually most of them did not choose to photograph plants. Most photographed other things. But each student was allowed or invited to also provide a small written statement alongside their work to sort of give the viewer more context for what they were seeing. I really liked this student's particular subject. They chose a bench that they passed every day on the way to school. And during the art exhibit, this student came up to me and they said, "Wow, I never thought I would have art up on the walls for other people to see in my life." I think he was an environmental studies student. And he said that he was also really excited to invite his mom to the show. So coming back to that recording of the metadata, it came in handy because next to each student collection of photos was the date and time that each photo was taken. And as you can see, there is some data loss here. The student took one photo sometime between 2 and 3 a.m., so probably forgot to record what time exactly it was and the exact date. But that's just part of science and art. And so recording the metadata also allowed us to create this sort of group timeline. The photos that you see here are arranged chronologically from left to right, which sort of represents a collective witnessing over time of the group and everyone's individual witnessing coming together in this one time series. You can check out the virtual exhibit and more of the photographs, statements, and also the student photographs using this QR code, or you can look up Conversations with Collections, and it's a Google site that you can see. So coming back now to the project goals, I think that the art show, the workshop, and the photographs really did touch upon all of these. Most importantly, I would say, is this goal to strengthen community connection to place and coastal ecosystems. One way to sort of judge that was asking for feedback. I put a notebook out in the exhibit, you can see it there, and invited people to sign it. And there was overwhelmingly positive feedback. You can even see that the show inspired some creativity itself. This one comment stuck out to me in particular, not only for its length, and that probably took a long time for someone to write, but they also highlighted the audio that was looped in the background of the exhibit that my talented intern Valentina Chavez put together. They noticed the coming together of each element above and beyond their singularity, and they questioned whether they were hearing recorded birds in the space or from outside. And so tying this all back together, why was this important? Ultimately, experiential education, outdoor education helps us form these emotional connections. It allows us to be a witness to local change, celebrate individual and community milestones and challenges, and it contributes to our collective memory. And the more that we feel connected to a place, the greater responsibility we feel to a place, and the more likely we are to work to preserve that place and share that feeling with others. So I want to leave you with these 3 questions again. What does it mean to be a witness to change in our surroundings? What does it mean to collect, curate, and preserve visual information? And how does the practice of observation of the natural world inform our daily lives? And I want to give a huge thank you to all the people who helped with this project, the people who collected and digitized the specimens in Sieber's collections, the past and present stewards of Chumash land that all of this work was conducted upon, all of my amazing workshop participants, Katja Seltman for her advice, members of the EEMB at UCSB, a few of whom are here today, which is very exciting, and then my interns Valentina and Caitlin. And you should also check out the CCH2 portal to search their collections. And thank you very much. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Hi, this is great. Thank you very much for sharing. I was curious whether you were successful in your efforts to attract a wide diversity of discipline or students from different disciplines in this project, because I know sometimes that's a challenge to get like folks from across, especially in that age group, with college students interested in a project such as this. So I was just curious, like, what kind of diversity you saw in terms of their academic disciplines, and even, I think you said undergraduate students and grad students too, so I was just hoping you could speak on that a little.
That's definitely a big challenge, I think, especially in this work. So I intentionally limited the size of the workshop, I think, to 10 participants. I think anything larger than that would have been a little harder to coordinate for my first time. But I had 3 PhD students and 7 undergraduate students. And I was excited to have some graduate students in there as well. 2 of the PhD students were from the English department, which was really awesome. They asked some of the best questions when we met each time. They were so inquisitive. Coming from that side. I had a handful of environmental studies and biology students, and then I believe 1 engineering student as well. So I think it was pretty broad in terms of what people were interested in. None of the students came from a visual arts background, though, which I thought was interesting and also, yeah, just an empowering thing for the students who had never had experience with art before, to be in that space and to feel like they were having this experience alongside others. Anyone else? Feel free to email me. I'm in Davis. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. It's been an interesting journey for me getting to this particular conference, given the fact that I spent most of my adult life studying northern elephant seals. This is actually my second time presenting at a CNPS conference. The last one was about 4 years ago, before the pandemic. I was invited by a friend of mine named Rick Halsey, who's the founder of the California Chaparral Institute. We met at an AEOE conference, which is an association where a lot of outdoor educators meet and confer and do workshops like this. And he invited me to come and speak on anything that I wanted. And so I chose to focus on the 400 species of bees that live in Pinnacles National Park. That was my first talk ever. This particular talk started out because of the fact that in the 18 and a half years that I've worked in outdoor education, first of all, UC Santa Cruz, when I designed their very first outdoor science program for underserved students in Monterey Peninsula and Unified, I transitioned from that to working for the Kern Environmental Education Program called Camp Keep, which has sites for students who live in Kern County and San Luis Obispo County. We serve students who come all the way from as far away as Mojave in California City. It's like a 6-7 hour bus ride to get to our outdoor school. And then in 2011, I started an outdoor school program called Delphinus School of Natural History. And these are some of my students. And one of the reasons why I picked galls in particular, first of all, I didn't know a whole lot about them. That was always, a good prompt for me. If I don't know anything about something, then I'm prompted or I'm motivated to go and study more about it. And so we were at Oso Flaco Lake down in Central Coast near Guadalupe, and my students kept asking me questions about these little red things they kept seeing on the salix. And so we started looking at them, and I said, well, let's open one up and see what's inside. And to my surprise, there was a little larva in there. I thought, oh, this is interesting. So how are we going to follow this through? And so each one of the students had to go out and find one of these, and then we had to go out and find out how they were formed. And that's when I learned that the gall sawfly is not really a fly, right? And that saw acronym basically is based on the fact that it uses a saw-like ovipositor to deposit seeds below the branches, the branch tissue of different kinds of plants, and particularly the willows. So if I just go like this, it will change. Yes. You've got a lot of galls. I thought that was just a cute title. My mom used to say that to me sometime, without the S. But basically examining California's connection between native oaks and Aurora willows and cynipid wasps, I didn't realize that there were so many different ways that you could teach outdoor science. One of the problems that many classroom teachers run into is when they want to teach outdoor education, they are required to use NGS standards as a benchmark, which gives you environmental literacy or scientific literacy, but it doesn't necessarily turn your students into environmental stewards who have an impact on their peers and their communities. And so the idea of experiential education is really, really critical, in my own personal opinion, for developing the next generation of stewards that we need to continue preserving what we're trying to do with the 3030 Project. The fact that outdoor education in California is not mandated creates extra barriers for people who want to get involved in that particular study. California's native oaks are probably one of the most important natural resources in California. There's thousands of animals and insects who depend on oak trees for their survival and for their reproductive success. This picture I took on campus one day of these woodpeckers, we were fortunate to have an oak woodland that surrounded our camp. And so one of the things we would do every day is just take some time and just watch the woodpeckers' behavior to see what they were doing. We discovered this was actually a family group. And this was their bank, and they protected it quite well. Any other birds from any other groups that came in from any other flocks were immediately attacked. And so we were able to actually watch them planting or embedding these acorns And then later on, we learned that sometimes they weren't actually eating the acorns, they were eating the insects that were in the acorns. And that you just had to leave them there until they matured enough where they could get inside the acorn and get the bugs out. If you look at this picture on the right, it shows you all the different interactions that oak trees have with native species. From mycorrhiza, below the surface, things that live and feed on the litter, on the duff. There's insects and animals that live in the trees, that's used for reproductive purposes, and it's a major food source, not only for wildlife, but for indigenous species. For thousands of years, acorns were considered a food staple, and just like corn is in parts of South America. One of my main goals when I'm outdoors with students is to teach them observation skills. And that takes practice, because when I say observation, what I'm really talking about is having students describe what their eyes actually see. We have a tendency sometimes when we draw a sketch where we see something, we try and infer either a particular type of behavior, or we try and figure out, or describe what we think is going on. And in many cases, we don't really know, but because we've been influenced by so many different things, we have a tendency to try and skip the observation point and go right to the solution or the answer. And so my goal with my students, this one over here on the right, she's looking at sea lavender, because we were talking about halophytes and the fact that there are some plants that are salt tolerant and some that aren't. And so in Morro Bay Estuary, we have pickleweed, we have saltgrass, and we have sea lavender. And so first of all, they had to observe it. Right? And then she picked off a little leaf. She goes, I see crystals on there. I said, what do you think that is? She goes, well, I'm not really sure. I said, well, where are we right now? And she goes, the salt marsh. So you think that might be salt? She goes, I don't know. I said, well, you can verify that. And she goes, well, how? So you got a tongue, don't you? And so that's what she did. And all of a sudden she goes, yeah, it is salty. I said, yeah, all these olives out here too. Right? And I can describe how pickleweed stores, salt water, and how saltgrass extrudes salt water through what I call pores. They're actually stoma. But I said, you sweat sometimes, don't you? You ever had, a really heavy day at playing sports or running or jogging, all of a sudden you start sweating and it gets in your mouth and you taste how salty it is? Same process. And so I'm always trying to connect prior knowledge to the new knowledge that I'm trying to get the students to understand. One of my favorite topics in biology is symbiosis. I spent a lot of time in my career talking about things like lichen and algae and fungi and how they are in a symbiotic relationship. And so I found this picture and I thought, that's perfect. First of all, I didn't know anything about cynipid wasps until about a month ago. But I knew a lot about oak trees. And so I thought, if I can find a way to create a lesson that will allow students to understand the symbiotic relationship that goes on inside that little village, then that will be a major accomplishment. And so, oak galls, some of you have seen them being passed around the room, they're a readily accessible tool for outdoor education. You find them on the ground. You can see them every time you walk through an oak forest. They're everywhere, and they don't cost anything. You can just walk around and collect them. You can cut them in half, and sometimes when you do, you will find things like this middle photograph where you find multiple species of wasps living in the same gall. Some native oaks host over 75 different species of gall wasps. This particular shrub, the scrub oak, has all these different galls growing on it at the same time, which tells you that there's many, many relationships that are expressed within oak woodlands. Accessing prior knowledge. I tell my students that much like gated communities or Minecraft apartments, this looks just like a gall to me. When I look at it up close, I thought, in fact, I was looking at some pictures on the internet and I was trying to find something that actually related to galls. And I saw this picture of a gated community and I said, that's perfect. It's actually perfect. And then the Minecraft thing was just to draw the kids in. Symbionts. Ah, I love that word. But I learned a lot about what we call inducers, inculins, and parasitoids. Inducers are the wasps that actually induce the immune reaction that you see in oak trees. They're the ones who plant the eggs, or lay the eggs, or deposit them. And then the inculins are kind of like uninvited guests. They don't actually produce, they don't help produce the gall, but they take advantage of what the gall has to offer, which is nutrient. So that's why the cat in the bird nest. And then, on the very end, the creepy parasitoids. Oh, that gets them going. Because I get to talk about the fact that there's 3 different kinds of larvae that can live inside a gall at the same time. Inducers, parasitoids, and inculins, all living in a basically symbiotic relationship. Some of it is not so commensal, as you will see with this next slide. There is a wasp that's called the crypt keeper, and they have a very interesting way of feeding themselves. Inside this gall, you will see that there are different chambers, and basically the crypt keeper is called Udraset, will lay its egg inside the crypt of another of another wasp. And then, as the original inhabitant starts to mature, something happens. A larva creeps up inside it and chemically induces it to do something that it wouldn't do ordinarily, and that is, it starts to tunnel out of the tree branch, but the hole that it carves out is not big enough for it to get its entire body through. And so what ends up happening is that it gets its head stuck in the hole, and it just stays there until it dies. And then the other larva that's in there, the set, it eats its way through the original inhabitant and crawls out and follows life along at its pleasure. When you tell students stories like this, they're like, when can we find one of these? You know? Let me back up just a little bit. So I also like to talk about, there's a new popular word, repurposing. Well, galls get repurposed as well. There is an ant called a Thymonothorax, which actually uses empty galls, usually node galls, the older ones that you see down near the trunk of the tree. They will actually excavate them and move their families in. And so oak galls get repurposed. Finally, it's one thing that I'm always trying to impress my students about is that you have to keep your eyes open. You have to be constantly vigilant about what's going on around you. Sometimes that requires sitting still, which is really difficult for 6th graders, or 5th graders, or 4th graders, or 3rd graders. Getting them to sit still for any more than 2 or 3 minutes is a major challenge. So if you can get them to sit still and just observe, and write about what they actually see, then you can embed in them the idea that there is a real connection between all the different elements they see in an environment. Finally, I'd like to acknowledge the people that have influenced me in terms of this talk, and I'd like to end with the fact that Delphinus School of Natural History's philosophy mirrors that of ancient indigenous cultures who believe that nature awareness involved understanding the natural cycle and its interconnections. Their lives were guided by what they call the original instructions. If you go back and look at indigenous tribes in South America or in the African continent or here in the United States, they had something they called the original instructions, which basically instructed students or young people as to how they were supposed to interact with nature, that they were a part of and not above. They were part of the cycle, that they can influence the cycle in many different ways, which is one of the reasons why I try and avoid using the term like climate change, because that allows climate deniers a lot of openings, because there's been climate change on Earth forever. Long before we got here, there was climate change. What I like to use is the term human-induced climatic disturbance, because that's really what's going on right now. And so We firmly believe that students who develop a deep personal relationship with nature become environmental stewards of nature instead of just casual observers. Selah. Thank you very much. Ooh, made it just in time. Yes?
Can you give us an example of how you teach your children to actually observe and see what they're looking at as opposed to jumping to conclusions?
Well, first of all, what I usually tell students is to look at an object and sketch it even, and then just describe what you actually see without trying to give it a name. A lot of times, I won't even tell students the name of a plant until we well into the conversation, because I want to make sure that they've observed as much about that plant as possible before they even get a name. Because usually, once you give it a name, you know, John, what is this? And if I say it's such and such, then they're done with it. They just take that information, they store it away, and they move on to the next thing. In order to develop good observation skills, you have to divorce yourself from trying to classify and identify and just focus on what you actually see. And that's the best method I have of doing that. If that means giving them a magnifying lens or giving them some tool to work with that will keep them engaged with that object, that is the key for me. All right. Thank you all.